Tonight's guest, Mia Lee.
Hi, welcome to PsychoSocial Mental Health Show. I'm your host, Lizzie Nojosa, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist.
And I'm your other host, Luis Cornejo, also a licensed marriage and family therapist in the beautiful San Francisco Bay Area.
Also known as Occupied Ohlone Territory. And so we're so excited. We have our very special guest and my beloved friend, Mia Lee. And we're going to be talking about guided journeys. Hi, Mia.
Hi. You're like, come on in.
Come to me.
Thank you. Hi.
Here.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Down.
Welcome, Mia.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course, thank you for being here. And we have to ask if you could share a little bit about yourself. We want to hype you up and also what you do.
Thank you. Yeah. So I have started my own practice of offering guided journeys. It's something that came to me several years ago, but it has been in process for at least a decade. You know how these things incubate and grow. But I've been in the Bay Area for 20 years, and so most of my community is here. I moved up here from Los Angeles. And so my practice it's based out of my home, basically. And so the great thing is that I can, be available to people anywhere that are English speakers, basically.
That's amazing. It's so funny because we're all from LA then, because I think we all moved from LA. I moved from LA up here too.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I always think that's funny when I hear people like, oh yeah, moved here from LA. I'm like, oh my God, me too.
Transplants, yeah.
So
I consider myself Californian though, because I love California.
Yeah, all over
100%.
California. So you were saying you see clients at home, and tell us, when we're talking about the topic guided journeys, what does that mean? Can you give our audience a little definition and however you want to, create it, right, or put it out there?
Yeah, it's something that is still shifting, and so I'm just rolling with it as it goes. Essentially, it's like guided visualization, but it goes a little deeper and it's more interactive. It does happen in that liminal state where you're in that not entirely conscious state. So I essentially guide people to activate like their vagus nerve and their nervous system to really just calm and settle in, and to allow you to access the parts of your brain that are usually just like so busy, running around, and we just bring it all to center. And often, if I'm working individually, we will have had an intake call where we discuss a topic that a client wants to explore. And I'll set it up for them with some scripting and let them enter the space, and then we navigate it together there from that space.
Okay, that sounds so powerful, and I'm wondering, what are some, or I guess who could really benefit from going on guided journeys, and I guess what are common reasons that people come to see you?
Mm-hmm. So it's one of those things where it's working with the brain and the nervous system, so it can help technically anyone, but for the most part, it seems to have the most impact with people that are either already practiced meditators or already have a spiritual practice that know how to regulate their systems and have done their own kind of exploration. I do work with beginners also, and I offer group journeys that are helpful for getting people used to that space. But essentially, I want to work with people that already are working on their personal developments and are aware of the barriers that they might have, or just areas that they want to shift, and help them transform whatever it is that they're aware of.
Yeah, it sounds like what I hear you saying is like working with people that already know what they want to work on. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It helps a lot.
And I when I think about like the nervous system, right, I think about living in this modern day society and how it can be really challenging to slow down and to like calm our nervous system, right? Because we're constantly like being hit by like media and like being in traffic for an hour commuting, and then like the stress of like having to go out and be in the world or what have you, right? So just the ability to like take a deep breath, like let it melt. That really is a skill, I think.
I felt it just from you doing that, but yes, exactly.
You know, and I was just thinking about that too. And so, and you mentioned beginners, and I was curious, I guess, where do you usually start with someone that hasn't had any experience? They're coming in, they're like, you know what, this is something that's calling me. I want to try it. I want to do this. What's that process like for a beginner?
Yeah, we do dive in. They're kind of, I don't know that there's a shallow end, but it's a very gentle process, which is part of why I feel like it is helpful for so many people. It's not like when you take medicine, certain powerful medicines, for example, that can really rock you, right? So the process is the same. There would be an intake call, an inquiry as to what it is that they want to explore. And I'll let them know roughly what to expect, but it's one of those things you just don't know until you do it. And it can be difficult to describe if someone has not been in a meditative space or any other, state of consciousness. So essentially, I need them to trust me to walk them through this and trust that we can organically discover things together. It's entirely a collaboration, and so it's very much about the relationship.
I love that. I think it's so important when we're talking about any type of self-work, especially with others, right? That it is described as a collaboration, right? Something that two people are co-creating or that's being brought in, right? And definitely, I think that's very powerful. I'm also curious when you were mentioning about how it can be very different, right? And you kind of have to do it, right? Like be in the space. What do you normally do, or how do you approach it when someone is struggling with just that intro part, right? Of allowing themselves to just be in that moment.
I would say that this approach is very much just meeting you where you're at. If you're in struggle, I'm going to meet you in struggle. If you're, in conflict or judgment of your experience, I'm going to meet you there. My job when I guide you is literally to accept you as you are, however you are, every moment of the way. And once you have that acceptance, as you probably know, something new will arise, and finding out what that is, and then writing that next, emotion, feeling, or whatever.
It sounds very experiential.
100%.
And I find that things that are experiential, you just have to experience it, right?
There's no way around it.
Yeah, you just have to experience it. Sometimes I think it's can be challenging to describe certain things. It's like you have to live that or have that experience.
Yeah. And it's such a beautiful concept too, right? What you were sharing about meeting people where they're at and allowing them to be, if they're in a certain place, to be there and to be able to move, freely. I think that's really important. It really, I think, empowers, right, and gives people a lot of opportunity to go through the process without feeling like they're taking steps or like they have to move on levels or they have to do all these things, but more of where are you at? What is it that you need right now? Even if you have a big goal, how are we moving towards these things?
I love that you so understand what I'm talking about. It's really great to be interviewed by people that do have a sense of it. And I actually am reminded of a client where there was a lot of, I guess, the struggle. I did several sessions with her, and I even got to a point where I'm like, can I even help her? And just accepting, I am not sure. I just know that I have to be side by side with her. And by the third session, and I'm going to put this in quotes because there is no objective goal necessarily. She got there in terms of having a really important experience of connection with herself that she hadn't had. But that was literally because, we were able to meet and encourage all the resistance that comes up. And oftentimes, we judge that, and we judge the yucky feelings and the barriers that come up, and that it doesn't work to fight against it. It really is just melting along with it.
And thank you so much for naming that, because I do think that it's a bilateral process, right? It's not just the person that we're supporting or helping, but also ourselves and the process we go through. And I've definitely felt like that, where I've worked with some folks and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, can I actually help them? Am I in the right space? Am I offering what they need? But then it's also a process for me of having to really, go into my own body and do my own work too. And so if you're a mental health provider, a healer, or if you're someone that's working with other folks, I'm pretty sure you felt that at some point, right, where there was the questioning, and it is a process for us too. So thank you for naming that.
There's also something very powerful of when somebody is in that mud, like feeling stuck in that icky feeling, and having, because so many times I was like, oh, I just want to like fast forward through that, and I want to get over feeling anxious or whatever those other feelings are coming up that just like don't feel so good sometimes. But having somebody sit with us and witness us and meet us where we're at, it's just like really beautiful holding container. And just to have someone sit side by side, be like, hey, you know what, you're not alone, I'm here with you, and let's just, we'll co-create and we'll work through this together, and then from that something really beautiful comes out. And you don't know what, it's like almost like, oh, you have a grab bag and you don't know what's in there, but you know there's something in there, but you got to sit through all this mud or whatever it is, and then eventually something will come out. You don't know what it is, but something's gonna manifest out of that.
I love how you put that. It is absolutely a grab bag, and it's hard to tell a client, I don't know exactly what is going to happen. I can't promise anything except that, if we engage together in a really honest and compassionate way, something's going to happen. It's likely going to feel amazing, wonderful, blissful, but it's all about the process to get us there, and without holding that agenda either.
That reminds me of like a saying that one of my previous supervisors would say to me all the time, and it was trust the process. And I used to hate it only because it was asking me to like literally like let go of my anxiety and this need for control and expectations, and instead just trusting that things would happen the way they're meant to. So it sounds a lot like that, and I think as you were saying it, I was like, oh my gosh, like I could probably use a lot of that, because I have my anxiety, and I often think about how these are tools, especially with meditations and mindfulness, and a lot of these other things that are often used in therapy, but in other practices as well. They're becoming very popularized, right? A lot of people. Yes, and I think it's wonderful, and I'm curious for you, as you see it grow, and now it's in apps, but it's also like people that do it, and it's also like in meetings. I mean, it's everywhere now, right? People talk about mindfulness, meditation. What are your thoughts about that? I saw you get excited, so I want to hear like, how are you feeling that this is becoming a norm?
Well, as practitioners yourselves, I imagine we're just excited about it, period, right? What I love about our industry is that there isn't this sense of competition, but rather the more it's out there, the better everyone is for it. And so the fact that it is becoming so much more normalized and so much more accepted and not stigmatized, to me, that's just a positive. And it's so like broad reaching. There's so many modalities, but for me, just any kind of healing or support that is out there for people around mental health and wellness, I am a fan of. Absolutely.
Yeah. I love that. And and these are practices that are cultural, right? These are cultural practices. A lot of them come from a lot of places around the world, and they're brought, into a lot of Western cultures. And I know a lot of people often kind of see this as new because they're not exposed to it, but I'm wondering for you, when you're thinking about how, some of these things come from various cultures, what are your thoughts about that and mainstreaming it and all of that?
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, can I just say something really quickly? New and like woo-woo too. Right?
Indeed, yeah. Yeah, so there's so many entry points into that discussion. And for me, I personally am not connected to like my parents' cultural indigenous practices, for example. And a lot of that is because of colonialism, right? And so that is an area I have yet to explore. However, I do know that the journey that I practice, I don't borrow from anyone specifically, and I actually ride the line of borrowing from Western psychotherapy as well as the spiritual process. But I think it is super important to make the acknowledgments that you're talking about. When I say that, it's wonderful that there's all this mental health out there, and that it is beneficial for everyone, I think we also know that there is a lot of appropriation that happens and that is actual damage. And so I really appreciate you bringing that up, because it's not about just, creating this this new culture that is still working within the systems of oppression that we have, but rather I think it's safe to say that the way we work is actually to lift anyone that actually is not already supported by those systems. So yeah, that's really important to do, and I try to stay mindful of that, and I will never claim any practice or what is it called? Either ancestry or lineage, I should say. I do feel a lineage, but I don't identify it specifically by culture, but rather by people. So yeah, it's super important to name.
Yeah, no, thank you for answering that. I definitely think these are conversations that often don't happen, right? Because they're tricky. There's so many different pieces. Even for me, just thinking about the question, I was like, oh, there's so many moving parts to all of this, right? Because it's very complex. And at the same time, I just felt it was important for us to also honor, right, that there's influences way before, that have led to creating so many of these new practices and new ways and new forms, right? And like I said, it's becoming accessible, which is super important and necessary. And yet we should also honor, right, that these things stem and come from a lot of cultural places and indigenous practices and things like that. So
one more point that I do remember in school, I was speaking to a fellow student. This is my undergrad, not related to psychotherapy or anything, but he was talking about just the incredible impact, not necessarily as a fan, but that Freud had on Western culture in terms of, identifying and defining the subconscious. And I was like, exactly. I was like, a lot of people knew about that way before Freud.
Yeah.
Good for you, Freud, but you can't claim that as your discovery, right? So
exactly.
Things like
and just young too, the collective unconscious and dreams,
Yes.
hello.
Exactly.
And I think that's why I was mentioning why it's so important, because we do see this constantly. We notice that some of these things aren't considered official or accepted until a white man someone with a lot of money or research says it's valid. And yet a lot of this is stuff that has been known, that there's wisdom there that's been passed down for years and years. And even when it's created into new things, I think it's so important to always understand our roots, right, and understand where things come out from, right? That's part of growth. That process that we're talking about is not just something that starts here. It's something that has been growing through years. And especially for us as humans, we have been around for a long time. We have learned to heal. We have learned to support one another. We have learned to create. And that's not just the technology around us. It's also healing and growth and connection and all of these other things.
Name it, acknowledge it, honor it.
100%. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And tell us, what, for you in this work, what are some of the, I guess I would say, challenges, but then also some of the joys for you that you get?
The challenges are, there are many, but it could be, the boring logistical stuff, right, of entrepreneurship and business ownership. And also having this be a specific modality that may not be mainstream yet. Mm-hmm. Understanding how to present it in a way that is not watering it down, but is neither too foreign or frightening. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that, the right fit, it happens, right? I will attract the right clients, and actually even scare away the right clients too, the right people that I'm not supposed to work with, right? Who may not be their thing. So for me, again, like I say, because I do ride this line of borrowing from a lot that I've learned in psychotherapy, but also having this other element that to me is very spiritual. And some clients I have worked with have no spiritual practice or atheists. It still works. And so however they choose to define it is fine with me. I don't feel a need for them to see it a particular way, as long as they benefit from it. But yeah, just to to present what feels like it might be a hybrid service, I guess, is a challenge for me. The joy is probably the same thing as y'all, is to have a client reach a place that is fulfilling, nourishing, replenishing, insightful, that guides them to something where they have more meaning or connection with themselves and their communities. It's entirely about that. So
absolutely, that's beautiful.
That sounds really beautiful.
It does. Yeah. I got a little stuck. I was getting distracted because when you were mentioning the first part, you mentioned entrepreneurship. I was sitting here like, oh my God, yes, that's definitely not the joy in any of this. And we're all entrepreneurs here. We're all like, I know Liz and I are first-time business owners.
The three of us then,
and it's a lot, right? It brings up so much because I think our line of work is so specific and so different than other spaces, right? Where we're helping people and we're growing and healing. It's very experiential. It's very almost like and even though I think systems have tried so much to quantify things, it doesn't work that way. And so doing the entrepreneurial stuff on the side too, on top of that, right? Advertising, promoting, doing the work, doing the financial stuff. It's like, so I was just thinking about that, how that definitely isn't the fun part, but I kept thinking too how it is part of that process too, right? Of that journey. And I love how you transitioned into saying, I know I attract people, right? A certain way. And I love that because I think for us as first-time business owners, we've had a lot of conversations on how do we get people to want our services. And one thing that I've told Liz and we've talked about is we attract, right? We let people see us for who we are, what we're offering, and going through that process. And it's not an easy process being, an entrepreneur, but then also offering these types of services, right? That, like you said, many of it is even with therapy, right? Therapy's been around for a long time, and yet it wasn't as mainstream or as much seeked out as it has been in the last 2 years because of the pandemic. So we see shifts in things, right? And
And I also really enjoy how you're saying you do groups too, right? Because eventually Lisa and I, we want to work with groups as well. And for me, it's just like, I want to reach as many people as I can. Like, I want to help support and have helping supporting healing with as many people, like healing for you. I know. Healing. Everybody watching, you got healing right now.
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. And I will say that y'all are doing an amazing job. I follow you on social, and you are killing it. And I know you're attracting the right people for sure. And you're naming what I named, but I'm going to go back to it. This is not a standard offering, and so finding any person or organization that supports us as we are is super important. I was lucky enough to have just taken a business course with an organization where there was so much values alignment, and I just realized it is out there, and it's not fully normalized yet, but it's happening, and it's really exciting to be in this time where it is happening.
Yes, absolutely. And speaking of personal growth and development, and you're mentioning going to a business course, how would you say your own personal goes into this kind of work, right? Like guiding people on journeys. What do you do for yourself to kind of prepare, take care of yourself, and go into that process?
Great question.
I know. Well, I know a lot of y'all are probably looking like that too, because a lot of us that work in this field, we tend to be the last ones to take care of ourselves.
Right. So I'm a huge fan of turning that on its head, and I think that's happening culturally right now too. In whether it's in movements, activism, healer spaces, is we're focused on sustainability now. It's been, it continues to be a sense of urgency where there's so much need all the time. It's constant. And so that only will create burnout culture because it is constant. And now there is, much more focus on making it sustainable and taking care of the caretakers. That is essentially how I look at it, because I want to help the helpers. Whoever is doing work that is putting out it could be in any field, but really working towards, equity and along justice values, that has like a reach that comes from the heart is who I want to support. I am just as much of a hypocrite as anyone else in the self-care game, right? And that also allows me to be honest and recognize when I'm either not doing well about it or I am, because it's that honesty bit, right? When we get in that zoned out space, because we are human, and what happens to us, we get zoned out, whether it's like through work or checking out or whatever, it's going to happen. That's fine. We're not here to prevent that from happening. We're here to catch it when it does and to just really gently catch ourselves and say, hey, that's what's going on. And so I put a lot of that into my practice. And that does mean that a lot of what is seen as a conventional productive lifestyle is not a good match. And I fought that for decades, thinking I had to fit into that paradigm of productivity, of not resting and not really nourishing myself. And I'm at a point where that is my number one priority, because I cannot show up for clients if I'm not doing that for myself. And that's hard because there's a lot of guilt that comes with that, shame that comes with that. And so I'm always giving myself reminders that this is literally my work. Nourishing myself is part of my actual job.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know what? And
It's so important.
I got so hooked on what you were saying around the piece around how for a lot of us, right? And I say this because I know I've experienced that, and I know so many folks who are in this field who have experienced it as well. Is that it's the burnout, but also the idea that because we're in this line of work, we're supposed to be perfect or have our shit together, and we don't. And and I think that's the other piece. What you were saying is being honest, and I think that's a big part for me too. That I value a lot is that I know I don't do everything the way I tell myself I'm going to, or the way I plan, or even sometimes following my own advice, that I give out. But I do remind myself, you know what? This is being honest with you. How can you do that and have that relationship with yourself too, where you're constantly striving to be a better version of yourself, right? In that way. And it doesn't mean perfection, because we won't ever get there.
And I think that at the end of the day, all you can do is your best, right? And for me, one of the things that I've learned and still learning is sometimes we're our own harshest critic. And it's just like you said, remind yourself, be gentle. And then if that critic comes along, you just be like, okay, critic, bye. Bye, Felicia, And just reminding yourself and being gentle, which I think is great. And we make mistakes too, and we're not perfect, and we're human. And at the end of the day, at least I know I did my best, and for me, that's what counts.
It really does. It really does, because we're working against a really strong culture of perfectionism and having things together.
That Puritan work ethic
is bullshit. Yeah,
it totally is bullshit.
Yeah,
it is. And I'm wondering, speaking of perfectionism and some of the folks that you work with, are you seeing folks in person or virtual, or how does it work for you when you're doing this work and you're taking on?
Yeah, so I actually meant to say earlier that when I say I'm working out of my home, it is all remote.
Okay.
Yes, so I am available in person if a client needs that. I do have a client that does prefer to meet in person. This doesn't even have to be on Zoom, which at this point, obviously, everyone is burnt out on Zoom. And so my sessions are done just by phone, because essentially you just need to listen to my voice. That's all that you have to do. You don't have to, people usually do it with their eyes closed. And so they're really just not even engaging with their surroundings, as long as it's serene and quiet as possible. So I'm open to it, but for the most part, phone is really good in part. And this might vary across gender also, but being able to access the parts of your brain and your nervous system that allow for this experience is actually easier to do simply by audio, which is, people talk about podcasts and other audio formats that really help get you into a certain space, because it strips away all the other senses and it helps your brain engage with those senses from a more neutral place and a more creative place also.
Okay.
Great. And if somebody's like, oh yeah, I'm really loving Mia's vibe, I'm digging her, she's amazing, I want to work with her, how can people get a hold of you to work with you?
So I have a landing page right now at miaklee.net.
And just so everyone knows, we're going to share this as well. So, you know, you don't have to keep going back trying to get the name of all the sites and accounts and all that. We're going to share that as well. So y'all can go in the description here in YouTube, and we'll put all the links and stuff for Mia too. But yeah, Mia, please, thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Yeah. So I am an old, and so I'm not super active on social media. So essentially the landing page, the website is what I have for now. And there you can email me or call or text. So yeah.
Okay,
awesome. That makes it easier, so y'all know how to find her. We'll have everything there for y'all. But Mia, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on here last minute. This was great. I appreciate a lot of the focus you put on us as well, right? All as practitioners, and not just the journey. Because when we invited you, I was thinking, okay, we're gonna ask so many questions about the types of people that go on these guided journeys. But it sounds to me like it's also a process for you, right? As someone that's giving these journeys, but then also, the bilateral process. So I just want to say thank you for talking about that.
I love how insightful you are. It feels so good because I feel very seen in this process. And it's, again, that's nourishing because we are often unseen because these processes are, supposedly hidden, or just it's not as obvious to see, and it's so rich and so wonderful. So thanks for naming all that. Yeah, and I'm so happy to be here too. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course, you're welcome. And everyone out there, like I said, you have the info here. Thank you for watching this episode, and we're so excited to have you see our next episode. We'll make some announcements on that too. But thank you for watching.
Stay tuned. Thank you.